Welcome to week 4 of My Week at the Club, where I bring you my weekly games from the Wachusett Chess Club in Fitchburg, Mass. I'm Roger Capello, a USCF candidate master, and this week I played black on board number 2 because I lost last week in the last round, which is round 5 of the Evert-Siskonen Memorial. My opponent was Ed Harris this week, a Class A player with a rating of 1838. Now, the last time I played Ed, he had beat me with the same colors that we had this week in the Anderssen's opening, but I was a bit more prepared this time. So Anderssen's opening is, as I've shown here, A3. I responded with G6. And the idea here is to try to demonstrate that A3 was a waste of time. That is, I want to achieve a position where A3 really isn't a useful move. And if I can do that, then it's as if I had white and he has black. There'd be a lost tempo. But if we play in an opening where this is useful, then it's a perfectly valid way to open the game. He followed up with E4, and I continued on with my fianchetto setup here on the king side. And he occupied the center, and I restrained the pawn from coming forward. I wanted to play my knight out to F6, but of course I didn't want to be attacked by this pawn being pushed forward. So this pawn on D6 restricts that idea. After I played that, he played knight F3, exerting more control over the center. I attacked E4, his center. I had, with a hypermodern opening like this. This is actually another Pirc, but a little unusual in that it has this A3 move having been put in. So it's really not a mainline Pirc, but it has a lot of characteristics similar to a Pirc. And I picked this because I thought that this was an opening where I don't want to do anything on the queen side here, such as playing the bishop out to b4 or whatever might one normally might want to do in a different opening. So instead, okay, get rid of this arrow here. All right. So instead, I attacked his center. He defended with a knight. And I just continued on with my development, castling. And he also continued on with his development. Very similar setup for a Pirc, except again for that pawn that's on A3. But this is a mistake because this allows the fork trick. The bishop and the knight here are separated by 2 squares, and I can push the pawn forward and attack both of those squares. So this is a very well-known trick that shows up in a lot of different openings where black can basically get equality in the center. So I take the pawn. He really has nothing better than to take back because he doesn't want to just give up that pawn. I fork him with my pawn. And now there's 2 ways it can play out. One is that he takes this pawn immediately and I recapture his bishop with my queen. But he chose the other way of doing it, which is probably the better way of doing it, which is to defend his knight. And then when I take the knight, he recaptures with the bishop. And the material is still equal. I didn't win anything, but it served to break down his big pawn center, that pawn duo of E4 and D4. Okay, now at this point, I played knight to D7. But what the computer suggested, and I think is a good move, is actually to immediately play C5 in that position. The idea being that with C5, I can open up this, probably open the center. He really has nothing better than to take. Well, he could defend, actually. That might be a bit better to play C3. But if he does take, then I can capture the queen, king takes, and then go after this pawn on C5 with a move like that. I guess maybe part of the reason I didn't want to do this is last week I traded off the queens early and it didn't work out too well for me. So psychologically, I was not prepared to go down a line like this week. So instead of doing that, instead of playing c5, I developed this knight to d7. And the idea here is I'm going to attack his bishop very soon. He castled, and I attacked the bishop, and it's got to either allow itself to be traded or step back, and I would have been happy to have the bishop here in this position. It's pretty open. If he allowed me to trade for the bishop, with rook over and such as this, and knight takes bishop and rook takes. This is really a pretty nice position for black, I think. So he did not do that. Instead, when I attacked the bishop, he just stepped back with it, like so. Then I thought for a while in this position because I had a little bit of a hard time figuring out how to continue on with my development. I was tempted to pin the knight with my bishop. The problem, of course, is that pinning doesn't work very well on the side where you phi and ketoed. So if I pinned immediately, he could just challenge my bishop with h3. And now this bishop here has to either has to retreat immediately or trade itself off for the knight. And I didn't like this position. It's just allowing him to catch up in development. So instead of doing that or retreating with my bishop back to d7 or something on such as that, in this position I decided to develop my bishop through the queen side and to get basically a double fianchetto with the two bishops attacking the center through this diagonal and through that diagonal, kind of a crossfire. Okay, he played at that point the move I expected him to, which was c6, which strengthens his d-pawn considerably. And now, in fact, for the last several moves, when I looked at this at the computer, it kept suggesting that I play c5 in these positions to break up white's pawn center. And I didn't do it here because I didn't want to have an isolated c-pawn. If I did play c5, for example, he could take, and then when I take back, I do have these isolated pawns. But the computer is not impressed. It thinks that black has enough open lines and activity for its pieces that, or his pieces, that black can do well here, and that it's worth having this weakened pawn structure. The other thing is this backward b pawn here will be easy to attack with my rook, and it will be hard for white to push it forward and strengthen it without just trading it off. I mean, he could play at some point b2, b4, but then I could just exchange, and I'm rid of that weakened c-pawn that I was worried about. So that was really a line that I should have considered. I didn't do that. Instead, after he played c3, I just played bishop to b7. Okay, he continued on, grabbing the half-open file for his rook, putting pressure on my e-pawn. I advanced it one square to strengthen it. This is probably okay. It does allow this pin, which is what he did. And I saw it coming, and I figured, well, the knight is defended, so it's kind of a weak pin. My queen can just move. And I played queen d6. Again, c5 is probably a better move at this point. But he has a little tactical idea in mind, which is to exchange the bishop for the knight and leave my bishop on this square undefended, which is a potential problem, and then to play bishop e4. I couldn't do that. He couldn't do that before because my knight was controlling b4, right? 2 moves ago, he pinned my knight, and after I moved my queen, now I'm exerting control over this e4 square. But he immediately trades that knight off, and now he can go ahead and grab a hold of the e4 square, which he does, and this counteracts my bishop on this long diagonal. Probably the smartest thing for me would have been to trade the bishop at this point, and it would have been a pretty even game if I'd done that. But I wasn't really that tempted by going down this line where he trade the bishops, and it's a chess game. I might continue something like this. It's fairly even for both sides, and at this point I was looking for something more. So I wanted to hold on to my bishop pair. He's gone and traded his bishop for the knight. I want to try to make something out of it. So after he did this, I played c6. But it turns out this is maybe not a very well-considered move, because this pawn is going to be pinned now because of the bishop attack on my bishop on b7 here. And so that ends up being a feature of the position over the next several moves, and causes some problems. So he puts another attack onto that pawn. I can't really allow him to just build up more and more on that c6 square. And probably what I should have done at this point was to play, instead of playing the rook over, which is what I did do, I should have played this bishop back, because the bishop is exposed on that f6 square. It's undefended, and undefended pieces always are the kind of the seeds of combinations. You don't want to leave your pieces sitting around undefended. And I've got, before in this position, I've got 3 pieces that are undefended. My bishop, queen, and other bishop are all undefended, so it's a pretty loose position. It's really not ideal. Now, the move I made at least strengthened my queen's position. So by playing rook over, now my queen is defended. But I still have problems with this bishop on f3, and the other bishop is weak too. So he played queen to f3 at this point, which is an interesting little combination. It's a double attack. It attacks this bishop that's loose, and I have to do something about. It also attacks this pawn on c6 a third time, with the queen, the bishop, and the knight are all attacking the pawn. It's only defended twice. So it's difficult for me to save the bishop and also protect this pawn at the same time. The only way I saw of doing that was to go ahead and trade the knight off. Okay, now at this point I wouldn't want to take the pawn, because obviously the bishop could take my pawn with the discovered attack of my queen. Right? So I dropped the queen back to c7 to maintain a defense on this pawn. And unfortunately, I'm not even threatening to play c5 now, because this bishop would then be attacked twice by the queen, and the white queen and bishop would both be attacking down this diagonal, and it's only defended once. So it's I'm kind of squeezed in this position. It's feeling a bit uncomfortable. Now he played queen to f6. I was relieved when I saw that. I expected him at this point to play this rook over to d1. And at first I was really worried by this move until I analyzed for a while, and then I decided, well, maybe it's not so bad for me. But I thought I was going to win the file for him. And open files are like highways into the enemy position. You don't want to give the open files up to the opponent. And the reason I thought I was going to lose it was because this queen is somewhat overworked. It has to defend this pawn on f6, and it also, in most of these variations, ends up having to defend the d8 square. So I was worried about something such as trading the rooks, and then if I play rook over to challenge his control of the file, he takes my rook and takes back, and then he wins the pawn. But fortunately, in this position, if we ever did reach it, my queen can just play is threatening to come down to d1 with checkmate. So I could just take his bishop, and he couldn't take back with the queen, or he would get checkmated. So this this sequence wouldn't work out for white. And so that made me feel better when I was sitting here in this position, worrying about that rook d1 move. I was still glad to see the queen to f6, though. And you might wonder, if I was worried about the attack, but in these Fianchetto positions, generally you'd need a bishop, a dark squared bishop here on black's king side, or a knight to help out the queen to penetrate on these dark square weaknesses. The white squared bishop really doesn't do much against that, and the rooks really aren't that good either. A rook, if it ever gets to the h file, I have to be a little careful about because it could sacrifice, or he could get the queen and the rook both on the h file and attack h7. But from that square. But that's quite a long ways off. So I wasn't worried about that. And meanwhile, I have some play of my own in this position. He's allowed me to get the 7th rank, his 2nd rank, and I'm threatening to mop up some pawns there. He took time out to defend his pawn. And after that, I doubled rooks, like so. And then there are various ideas here in my head of either of somehow doubling my rooks on the 7th rank, like maybe pushing this c pawn, trading off the bishops, and then playing this rook here and this rook up there. So that's kind of the long-term plan. I was hoping to see something along those lines develop. But what he did was quite reasonable, and it was a good move. It was to play h4, and it does two things. One is that it relieves him from the threat of a back rank mate, so that his rook he's not tied down with both rooks to the back rank anymore, and this rook could come up to e3 without having to worry about this check on d1 leading to mate. The other thing is that this pawn over here on h4 can get pushed up to h5 and tear open this Fianchetto position, and then I do have to start worrying because, for example, a rook that if it came like that and then all the way down to h8 would be checkmate. So that sort of thing could happen in the position. So I really don't want to see that h file open up. Okay, so after he played h4, I had to take some countermeasures. I played c5 immediately. And the reason for that is to get my bishop into the defense of my king side. So after c5, he went ahead and pushed his h-pawn. And I played bishop takes e4. And it turns out, according to the computer, I didn't really realize at the time, but the computer pointed out this is really not a good move. And the reason it's not a good move has to do with a move other than his response. What he did to respond was the natural thing of just recapturing my bishop. And that's not his best move. The best move at this point actually is to go ahead and push h6, because that threatens checkmate immediately. Queen g7 is checkmate. And in that position, black, there's no way I can get my queen from where it is over to f8. I have no piece to defend on g7. All I can do is run with the king. And if I run with the king, this doesn't work out well, because he can then take my piece. Now that he's forced my king over, I have nothing better than to keep running with my king. And he comes in with a check, chases my king out. He takes the h-pawn. I keep running with my king. And then he's threatening to just run with the h-pawn and up to promote with the queen. I have to do something about that. I start to bring my queen over to defend. He pushes the h-pawn, and then it looks like I'm defending okay, but I'm really not, because he just steps back. And if I blockade with my queen, that doesn't do the job, because he can just take the f-pawn. So things are really pretty grim here. He just cleans up my whole king side. So I don't want to get into that situation. Fortunately for me, he didn't capture. on e4. I mean, he did capture on e4 immediately. Rather, a second, come back here to the right position. Yes, he did capture in this position. He captured on e4 instead of pushing the h pawn forward. So he played rook takes. And that allowed me to play rook up, which also is not a good move. Turns out that black's best chance here would have been to just capture the h-pawn and let myself in for a little bit of misery with the open file and the weakened pawn structure on my king side. But that didn't even begin to enter my head. So I thought rook d1 would be a good move, but I was worried about one possible reply to it. I was afraid he might just play king to h2, ignoring his rook, because the problem is, if he does that, this rook is taboo. If I take it, I'm dead, because he plays pawn up now, and this is a very bad variation of what we were looking at before, because now he gets the rook to support his queen coming in on the weakness on f7 here. I have it defended with my queen, it's true, but that can get cut off because my king has to escape. So what happens is, okay, black has to do something in this position. A reasonable try is to double up the rooks and to bring that rook back to where it's can help out and support the defense of this rook on d8. But there's simply this sequence here where white checks the king over, checks him again, and now the king has to go up to the second rank, which blocks the defense, the queen's defense of this vital square. And he just takes with the rook. The king goes to either c8 or c6, it doesn't matter which, and he just takes the queen check and then takes the other pawn. And not only have I lost my queen, but I'm losing quickly with these very weak position of these pawns that are all broken apart and undefendable. There's no way to hang on to my king side. So instead of all that, fortunately, when I checked him, fortunately for me, he went ahead and took my rook, allowed me to take his rook back, check. His king comes up, and that was a clearance move. So previously, there was no way for my queen to get over to defend the king side, but this little sequence, go back a few moves here, this sequence here allows my queen then to slip into this d8 square, where it attacks his queen and also allows me to come over here to f8 if necessary to guard the g7 square. So after I played this, Ed just played, for quite a while here, played rook back to e2 to keep my rook from marauding on the second rank, his second rank, and offered a draw. And I said, oh no, because last week I lost a game after Gary Broussard had offered a draw, and I refused it. And went on a few more moves and managed to lose the game. And I thought for a while, and I still, once again, I felt like, gee, I think maybe I have a better position here. I was a little better at this point, according to the computer, but again, maybe I should have seriously considered taking a draw offer. But it's always harder to accept draws when people that are lower rated than you offer them, because not only is it a draw, but you also lose rating points, and it's somehow you feel like it's a miniature loss or something, a tiny defeat if you accept the draw. So I didn't accept it, and instead I did something snazzy. I shouldn't have done something snazzy. I should have just played queen takes queen, pawn takes, and then pawn takes pawn according to the computer. And then I would have been, I would have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns against his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a rook and pawn endgame. It probably is a drawn rook and pawn endgame, but at least black is the one with the advantage. Instead, I did something sort of cute. I went over and sacked the rook on h1. And the idea here was that if he plays king to g3, then I can simply win this pawn that's on h5. And now maybe I have a pretty good position, especially with this king stuck out here in the center. Sorry. No, I can't do that because my queen is hanging. But what I can do is trade off the queens first and then take like so. Okay, and I've won a pawn. Again, it's probably maybe not enough to win a rook and pawn endgame, but at least it's an advantage for black. So I would have liked that sequence. He didn't do that. When I checked, he just went ahead and simply took my rook. And now the idea is I play my queen down check. He has, well, he can either play king up or come back with his rook. He actually played his rook to interpose in order to get my queen off of this diagonal that his pawn is on. But it really doesn't matter because after I take the rook check, then I can get either on this white squared diagonal or the dark squared. I chose the dark squared diagonal because it seemed like if I went to e2, I could easily get blocked off. It turns out that both ways of doing it are equivalent. Either way leads to a drawn game. And so what I did, though, by playing queen to d2 was now my queen is defending this square, so his queen doesn't have an easy perpetual. So that was my thinking. And if he pushes the pawn to threaten mate, I can simply take it. And meanwhile, I can play my queen in at some point and try to win this pawn too. However, he's got simple play here. He blocks me my control of this h6 square by interposing the pawn, and so instead I have to go to the white square diagonal. I probably should have come here to d1 because that would have kept control over d8. But instead what I did was to play the queen to d2, and that allowed him to simply play queen d8 check. My king has to come up, and queen f6 check, and we settled for a draw since it's a perpetual check. So I tried to win. It didn't happen. I only ended up with 3.5 out of 5 points this month in the tournament, which is a bit of a disappointment. But you know, you do the best you can and see what happens in the games. So new tournament starts next week. It was going to be only a 4-week tournament, I believe, because then the 10-round or 11-round round-robin championship for the club championship, closed championship, starts after that. And so this is a little bit of an unusual tournament next month that is only 4 weeks long. So I'll be back with round 1 of that. And until then, have fun playing chess, and I'll see you over the board next time. Bye-bye.